lecture. It's a pleasure to have Alessandro Vespingani with us at short notice. Alessandro is a distinguished professor at Northeastern University in Boston, I think, Massachusetts. And he's with a background in first physics and then complex networks, in which he's published much work. And more recently has been very much involved in epidemic modeling, as you will shortly see. So I think that's really all I need to say. So welcome, Alessandro, and we look forward to you speaking on computational epidemiology at the time of COVID-19.
Thank you very much, Dennis. It's really a pleasure to be here. So I will try now to share my screen. So let's be patient for one minute. And please, can you confirm that you see my screen? Yep. Yeah, the only things is that I need to okay, so no, I'm trying to move my just one second. Okay, let me put things here and okay. So we are back. So do you see the picture or just the screen?
So you see the first slide?
Yeah, so you don't see our little videos, no? So you just see the slide on your screen.
Right, no, yes.
Yeah, perfect, good. Okay, so thank you very much again. It's really a pleasure to be here and have the chance to tell you about the work that we are doing. And since this is, if I'm not wrong, the title is about new modeling, old modeling, etc. I will try to give a little bit of a perspective of how the field has evolved recently. Let me say that I will present a lot of work that actually is in collaboration with a large number of teams and people, a large team at Northeastern University, but also collaboration with the Fogarty at NIH, MIT, two foundations in Italy, and University of Florida, and Fred Dutch Institute, where this is basically his work done under the umbrella of the Center for Inference and Dynamics of Infectious Disease that is led by Beth Sauleran, and this is an NIH Center of Excellence. And you know, let me say that I will present the work that we have done with our group, but you know, COVID has been, I think, for modeling a completely new level of collaboration among modeling groups. I've seen so much work done in the past 3 months and so much communications that is really, I think, this experience will change the field moving forward to all sense. And I will present our own work, but really there is fantastic work by other groups and other modelers appearing every day. So let me start a little bit by this consideration. So if we look at numerical weather models and numerical epidemic models, this is a very short history of the two fields. And if you think somehow they start very early in 1920 with Richardson that tries to manually integrate the equations of the atmosphere. He fails, but actually this is a proof of concept that if we have enough computational power, we can do numerical weather models and forecasts. And then numerical epidemic model, if we go back to the 1930s, we have Reed Frost, you know, simple chain binomial models that integrate stochasticity, although at that time they had to do with a kind of sandbox computer. They were taking urns from balls and urns of different colors to see, okay, who are the infectious, who are the susceptible, etc. In 1950, however, you know, the numerical weather models take off. You know, there is the first implementation on a large computer. We are talking about ENIAC. This is really, you know, the time in which simple computers were two-story building, and you know, it was a 24-hour computation for a 24-hour forecast. So that's something that you would say utterly useless, but what, you know, was the proof of concept that you can do numerical weather forecast. And then, you know, the evolution just is a rush and is a success story. In 1955, there is numerical weather predictions. In 2000, you know, you can imagine just not the regular weather forecast services, but all the applications and commercial applications like the one that we find on our mobile phones. This is not the case for numerical epidemic models. If you think about what has happened in 1980, 2000, we have the first progress for large-scale detailed models, data-driven models. You know, in 2005, 2006, you know, spurred by avian influenza threat, etc. You know, we had the first large-scale agent-based model, and then, you know, in 2015, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, start to have operational tests for the forecast of the flu season. But so really, there is a large gap. There is a 50 years difference in the two fields, and this is mostly due, you know, it was mostly due to in a sense, to lack of data. If you think, you know, for the investment for numerical weather forecast, you know, we sent satellite in orbit, you know, et cetera, and actually this was not the case if you think about epidemiology and all the measurement that we need, especially at the social level. So, you know, for what we do and how we move, how we get in contact as individuals. Well, these are all change in the last 20 years, and I'm talking about what I call, with a very bad word that unfortunately is getting more and more space, that is called the datafication age. So, you know, the last 20 years we have observed, you know, spectacular advances in the digitalization of data. You know, every 1.2 years, actually I think now is every year, so we basically produce more socioeconomic data than all the previous history of mankind. And, you know, we can use those data now in a complete different way. And I'm talking about data that goes from, you know, the human interaction and contact networks that we can now measure, for instance, with RFID tags or other devices for sensing at the resolution of a few seconds. This is what you see here. It's what happens in a school. This is an experiment done by the Social Patterns group in France and Italy. So you see that you can monitor how kids of different grades, you know, meet every 30 seconds, and then you can aggregate during the day. At the same time, we have all the omics and all our understanding of networks and multi-scale networks within the body, and that's very important for our understanding of pathogens, viruses, etc. And then we have more and more information about, you know, community networks, et cetera, and you know, this is something that goes from, you know, the huge amount of pathogen genome data that we can harvest in real time, mobility data at an unprecedented level for commuting patterns, human mobility that you can trace through mobile devices, population data that you know, combine census data with things that are like, you know, satellite images and light emission from captured by satellite. So all this is opening an amount of data and making available an amount of data that we can finally use in epidemic model. And then there is something also very important that happened, probably not in the last 20 years, but in the last 10 years, is what we call novel digital data streams. So for the purpose of epidemic modeling, we can now use you know, the technology in an active way, like, for instance, a participatory platform in which you can ask people, what are your health status? What is how to say, do you have fever, do you have cough, you know? And these are experiments like the one done by Flu Near You, InfluenzaNet in Europe, in which you basically have volunteers, citizens that contribute their health status so that we can capture the prevalence of the flu or other diseases. This is, I call, active data collection, because you have really to involve the volunteer, the people in this process. But then there is also a lot of passive data collection. So we all post on Twitter, on Facebook, we use thousands of other platforms at this point where we store our data as well as our thoughts in a way, and we can use those to study and model infectious diseases. All this is, you know, it's unprecedented, because for the first time we are not just accessing if people are meeting in a certain place and what is their number of contacts. Actually, we are even accessing what they are thinking, what is their level of awareness to a specific disease, their level of concern, and so on and so forth. And this is, if you want, is what has happened in the last 10 years with what it was 2009, 2008. And you probably, some of you might remember an article that was by Chris Anderson on Wired that was called The End of Theory. So the idea was that now we collect so much data in all forms and digital forms that actually we can just throw all those data into some machine learning, artificial intelligence algorithm. This algorithm will learn from the data and will spit out some association correlations and then also forecast. And you know, the idea in this article that actually was very influential was that, well, we don't need any more a theory of phenomena. We just have data and we can look at those and get, you know, whatever we want, but without understanding those what is the mechanistic processes underlying the phenomenon. But you know, we can live without that. And actually, the closure of the article was it's time that science learns from Google. That was a quite scary piece. That at the same time was followed shortly by a kind of poster child of that was Google Flu Trend. The Google Flu Trend was, and it is, a very smart and bright idea, and to say, well, you know, CDC collects painfully influenza-like illness visit to reconstruct the flu season. It takes time to do that, and whatever picture we get for the influenza season is always 1 or 2 weeks lagging with respect to where we are. And the idea was, okay, but why don't we use just the Google searches? You know, we have billions of Google searches every day. We can isolate and extract those that have reference to keywords or concept related to the flu. And if we throw those data into a machine learning that use past data from the CDC to train the system, we can transform the signal that we get from Google searches into something that is predictive, or at least it provides nowcasting for the flu without any delay. And initially, this was a very successful process that actually, you know, was repeated through Twitter, through Wikipedia, through many other platforms, including, for instance, OpenTable. OpenTable is a restaurant reservation systems, and by looking at how many people cancel reservation at the last minute, you can get a very good proxy signal for the flu season. So initially that was wonderful, and the only problem is that then you know, Google Flu Trend went through several missteps and several issues, and the last one was in 2013, when at certain point Google actually had forecasts that were overshooting by almost 100%, more than 100% with respect to the actual CDC data that was coming out from the CDC a few weeks later. Well, this is you know, this is there were several reasons for this problem, and I think this was a sobering moment for the field, because the idea is that actually, you know, if you have a lack of micro level understanding, you know, you can be very good, but you have a black box effect, you know, and so you have all the problem of lack of causal inference. You are not considering the microscopic processes, etc., etc. There are also issues related to intrinsic biases, data incompleteness, noise, and as well as the fact that those platforms, the social platforms and novel digital data stream that we use are live platforms. So for instance, Google changed the way we search and hints to us searches. And so that also, you know, should be refactored every time into the various algorithms. So there are many issues. There is also one issue that is related mostly to inductive approaches and dynamical systems. And I really suggest the reading of the Ojni and Vulpiani. It's in Philosophy and Technology. It's really a paper that shows why there are some problems that are intrinsic to forecast through proxy data, which are related to basically to some foundational problems of dynamical system, like the Poincare recurrence problem. So if you don't have the right dimensional projection, you sooner or later ends up in problem. And the other problem is also the fact that, you know, those machine learning algorithms always assume that, you know, the more data you have in the past, and the more they will be generally precise and reliable, while unfortunately we know that the past is not the present, especially when we talk about infectious disease. The healthcare systems changes, the society change, and, you know, using data which are too old for the training might be very dangerous. And this is another important work that has been put forward by Sam Scarpino and Giovanni Petri in 1 year ago. So this was sobering, as I was saying, for the community, but now we have to be very careful, because in the last few years, the narrative has changed a lot, in the sense that now nobody talks about big data and throwing big data into machine learning algorithm. Everybody, however, is talking about artificial intelligence and the fact that, you know, artificial intelligence in transforming science in a way that I don't think has changed really the factor, you know, because artificial intelligence works because it's fueled by the big data part, in a sense. And now the way, however, people is answering the black box issue is somehow even more puzzling to me, you know. And many cases they refer to what are called the Polanyi paradox, you know. It means that, you know, we generally know more than we can tell or explain. You know, if you think about the way that you teach your kids to bike, you know, you don't start by explaining the radius of gyration, momentum, and all the physics. And actually, you know, it's not really not helpful in learning how to bike. You just put your kids on the bike, you know, push it and hope that you know, he doesn't fall, and he will start learning the process. So in a sense, you know, it's true that we know much more than we can explain, in a sense, and now this is you know, somebody is, in a way, this is applied to artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is right, it knows more than it can explain, or at least we humans are not able to completely open those black box, and just, you know, in a sense, we have to take those results as face value, in a way that it's, however, as I say, puzzling, you know. And I don't think is a major shift from what we had 10 years or 12 years ago with the big data problem. But, you know, that's what I think also should motivate us to go for models, and to go for mechanistic models, and in a sense go back to what has been the paradigm of weather forecasting, which, you know, we can do actionable modeling with new data. And when I mean new data, yes, we have to tap on this data revolution. And the data are not just the big data, but are the big, small data, every kind of data that we can get. And we can use those data actually to acquire new knowledge, to acquire new understanding of processes, and produce new theory that was not available before, through interpretability, through mechanistic approach, effective equations, and systems that work with initial condition, and for which we understand the prediction limits. In a sense, what we want to do is to go from the simple time series to something that is, you know, what we have when we do the hurricane projections, where we have ensemble of models, and so on and so forth. This means also that we go back to in a sense, to the old modeling that has been mentioned in this series of talks. So we go back to the individuals. We relate what we see in the data to concepts like the basic reproductive number. I don't spend here time on this because I assume the audience is very well, how to say, trained on reproductive number, exponential growth, and everything. But you know, you go back to the mechanistic and the basic processes that describe the evolution of the disease. And you know, with the advantage now, with the how to say, with the ability of going from the simple that you know, it's important because can be in many cases tackled analytically with explanation, with equations, to something that is progressively, you know, more complex, in which we introduce social structures, we introduce contact networks, we introduce multi-scale models in which, you know, there is not just the network of single individuals, but the network of traveling, the origin destination matrices of traveling national, domestic, international, and so forth, down to the level of the very detailed agent-based model. At this level, obviously, you are very realistic, perhaps, but you lack transparency. In some cases, it's hard even to validate those models, and that's why, you know, you want always to keep the two sides of these approaches related one to each other, in order that we have some actual understanding of the system. And this is what we did try to build in the past 20 years. I say now I dive in the part where it's the work of my team and collaborators, but let me say that you know, there are a large group of modelers that are working along those lines. And so the idea is to get the data, you know, get the data, develop data-driven models that might be very detailed. So where you have all the population resolution that you need, all the mobility data, for instance, in this, in our global and epidemic and mobility model, we tap on all databases of International Aviation Association and OAG scheduler, so that we have real-time data on mobility, commuting patterns, etc. On top of this synthetic world that we build, you can model the disease, and each disease a specific model. There is no model that fits all disease, because you have to keep into account the mechanistic processes of the transmission. And then, you know, if you have initial conditions, you have understanding of the disease, you can simulate and perhaps even forecast what is the evolution of the disease worldwide or locally at different scales. So if we go a little bit into looking at what is the problem when you work at this level of scale and complexities that you have. For instance, here you see what we have here. So, you know, this is, I think is Milan or Rome. No, this is Rome, and these are origin destination matrices from Rome to other places in the world. And you see, this is travel patterns that works on several hours, and it's not just several hours, it's also, you know, of people that probably travel and stay there for, generally for international travel is about 2 weeks, the rate of going back to the origin. And then at the same time, you have what is, you know, this inset that tells us about all the local mobility and commuting patterns that you have around Rome, that actually happens at on the scale of a few hours. And so you see, you have a multi-scale problem where you are integrating mobility of agents on different scales. And if you want to have an idea of how it works, this is a large reaction diffusion system of a network, where we have discrete individuals that follow mobility stochastically according to the actual data, to the data that we have from the different databases that are integrated, that belong to certain subpopulations. And again, you know, here is where you use those highly detailed map that goes down by 5 miles, or even smaller resolution for the number of individuals in that area. And then you have models that are, you know, generally stochastic models of different complexity. This is a very simple chain binomial processes of an SIR type disease, but this can be made as complex as you can imagine. as I said, you know, there are working with these effective equations that handles the time scale, the different time scale in the process is not always easy. There must be several how to say, approximations and schemes that makes viable the integration of the system. Otherwise, not even the largest computer would be able to deal with that. And you know, this is a little bit, if you want, what is what would look like in Europe a kind of meta-population approach like this one, where meta-population is because we have this tessellation of the world around major urban areas and transportation hubs. Those are the catchment areas of, therefore, generally the international travel of the population. And then you have also the domestic patterns and the disease progression within each subpopulation can be modeled at different level of resolution, from simple homogeneous models if you don't have enough data, to instead considering contact patterns like the one related to age structure, in which you can tap on data like the polymod survey, where you have, you know, the frequency of contact among individuals of different age brackets, or synthetic construction through agent-based model. And then you can go down to the level of single agent-based model, like this one, in which you basically reconstruct from microcensus data all the households in specific places, and each household is really rich of data, like the age of the kids, like the age of the parents, or whoever is in the household. And then you also associate those individuals to workplaces, schools, etc. So these are generally very large scale effort that takes a lot of human resources in order to develop the synthetic population. And just let me stress again why this is a network problem in the end, because at the very end what you create are bipartite networks like this one, in which there are individuals, and here there might be perhaps millions of individuals or hundreds of thousands of individuals, and then you have locations. So the locations are the household, the schools, the workplace. And, you know, this bipartite network can be projected into the unipartite, or in some cases, in more refined approaches, multiplex network with different layers, in which you have the level of contacts of individuals and different kind of link or edge among those individuals, depending on the setting. And that's generally very important for infectious disease, because the transmissibility of the disease in different settings like household, workplace, schools might be very, very different. And so at the end, you know, those very detailed agent-based model construction are encoded in computers in the form of large scale networks or multiplex networks, and you know, these allow us to work into algorithmically through these multi-scale network problems, in which you have networks within specific subpopulations, and then those networks are linked through other networks of traveling patterns, mobility patterns across the world. Well, at the end, what you have, you can imagine, this is, for instance, some simulations we did of a highly pathogenic disease spread. The disease was seeded in London, and you see that what happens in a baseline scenario, in which, you know, people can travel for a few days before being very sick, and so you have that the exposed people are carriers, and each of these single lines that you see in the animation are single individuals that have traveled on a specific flight, or perhaps in some cases more than one flight, taking a connection, and then seeded the epidemic in the arrival place. So I don't think that with this audience I have to stress enough that this is a single realization, and when we work with this kind of models, we have to repeat those single realizations hundreds of thousands of times, in some cases even more, in order to average statistically what are the patterns that we observe and extract what are the statistical regularities, and not just obviously the stochastic event that might be not important in the overall description of the disease. Those statistical regular patterns emerges because the generally mobility and transportation networks have specific backbones, and so some connections are so important that disease will always follow certain specific always follow statistically privilege some specific patterns, and then, you know, at the very local level you have more noise and you lose resolution. So let me at this point say something important. When we use these models, a lot of discussion in recent years have been put around forecasting and how we can use modeling for forecasting. But as we all know, you know, these models, even the data-driven models, are much more important than just the forecast. And I'm talking about situational awareness, intervention planning, projections. That means basically what-if scenarios that at the same time can use as counterfactual for epidemiological explanation, structured reasoning, and so on and so forth. These were I want to stress that there is a very nice discussion of the importance of modeling in general, especially for outbreak response, like the one of COVID in these days. And this paper was an editorial on PNS in 2014 in the midst of the Ebola crisis in West Africa. So I think it's quite important to stress that we can use models in data-driven models in ways that are important beyond the value of the simple forecast of what is the number of cases of a disease in 4 weeks or 1 month. So let me give you now some example of that within the context of the modeling activities that our teams are carrying out, and about COVID-19. So, well, I don't have to spend too much time about COVID. You all know it's the disease emerged probably late November, early December in China, in the area of Wuhan. The first case appeared in Wuhan, was recorded in Wuhan, you know, on the 8th of December. Then it was some, how to say, complex time in China. Then, you know, it has been identified, and then we have all the story about, you know, the shutdown of all the traveling from Wuhan, then the shutdown of China, the lockdown, and so on and so forth. So how we use the model? Well, I think the first example of model like that includes data-driven mobility is indeed for situational awareness. So what does it mean, situational awareness? The first things, if you go back in January, was, okay, how we know that there was a cluster of atypical pneumonia in Wuhan. How large is that cluster? You know, there was no clear evidence for human-to-human transmission, but then at a certain point, cases start to appear in Thailand, in Taiwan, in South Korea, etc. So at that point, what you can do, and that's even before describing the disease, is to look at transportation patterns and mobility data from that area, from Wuhan, and say, well, what is the likelihood that I observe 3 or 4 cases by January 23rd, or any date you can imagine, given that at that date there have been a certain number of cases? Well, you know, at this point you can perform simulations that are completely agnostic to the disease, and just assume a certain number of cases in the origin place of the disease, and have estimates of the size of the magnitude of the outbreak just because of the number of people that travel from that area to the different places. And basically, it's a kind of backtracking calculation in which you say, well, I have observed by this date certain number of cases, how many cases are at the international destination, how many cases I have at the origin of the disease. And this is what, for instance, what we did with our model. Oops. Why is stuck? Let me try again. Yeah, and so you see that, for instance, after, I think this was the last estimate we did, was sometime in January, by looking only at the importation before the various travel bans were in place, and we had an estimate of more than 30,000 cases before January 23rd. Those numbers were growing as soon as the number of cases detected internationally were increasing. This is, however, it's still something that doesn't take into account specifically the transmissibility of the disease. Actually, you have to consider what is the incubation time or the exposure time in which the individual exposed can travel, but it doesn't require a lot of information. But when we get more and more information of the disease, then we start to have generative modeling approach. A generative modeling approach in which we describe the disease as usual as a compartmental structure, but this is for the progression of the disease, but then we keep the discrete individual nature of the people in the various area. And actually, you don't need initially all this complexity that you see here with hospitalization, intensive care. These are data that generally are not available at the beginning, but you can focus on more simple SCIR kind of model, where mostly the most important parameters are generally here. So, what is the latency period, the infectious period, and the generation time, or eventually in case the serial interval, depending what you have. What you can do at this point is to simulate the epidemic in China, and then you can calibrate the model again through, for instance, approximate Bayesian computation to the number of cases detected internationally, and that's because this is likely more, more reliable than the case reporting from the affected areas, where generally there is a very large underreporting. Here too, you have to consider underreporting. We know that only between 30 to 50% of the international cases were observed, can be detected in a sense, and that was initially the results from several groups that made inferences on that. And so these results can be used within the generative model to provide calibration of the model through approximate Bayesian computation, in which you say, well, I have these parameters, and then I see these cases of importation, how many configuration I basically, what is the likelihood that those parameter set represent my evidence. And here you see, for instance, this is our different curves. The red dots are the evidence of people detected internationally, and you get a posteriors for the reproductive number and the other parameters. These allow to look at the progression of the epidemic in China and have some analysis of model consistency. Here is the number of projected cases by early February and the actual number reported by the WHO. This correlation is, you see, is quite good, but it doesn't have to be misunderstood for an agreement between the number of cases reported and the model projection. Here there is a factor 5 to 10, with respect in terms of number of infections. That's because there is no assumption here. Actually, you calculate the underdetection rate from the model with respect to the actual data. And then you can also do well consistency with respect to the geographical spread and other indicators. Well, when you have this set up, well, a global model allows you to follow how to say, to follow the travelers in a way, and look at where infectious people go and potentially see the disease. Here you see what is the travel pattern from Wuhan before the travel ban. And so you see that Wuhan was the major contributor to cases in Thailand, Japan, basically all over the world. And then there were few other regions in China that were contributing some cases because the epidemic was already spreading in areas like Shanghai and Beijing. But then after the travel ban from Wuhan, that basically shut down the international connections as well also as the domestic traffic, you see that, you know, the importation into across the world are coming now from other places in China, like, you know, again, Shanghai, Shenzhen area, Beijing, etc. Well, this is until early February. At early February, all the travel restrictions issued by governments and China itself entered the process. And what you have is that the model, by simulating those interventions, by closing the traveling flows as from the data, is able to, how to say, to provide statistical projections of the evolution of the disease and the importation of the disease across the world. Here you see some of our analysis you see that cases were coming from China, but then at a certain point in Europe, there was a cryptic phase of the epidemic with transmission that was also affecting the US, including especially the New York, New Jersey area and some area of California. So you see, you can actually compare these, and this is interesting from the modeling part, although it opens a very a large number of theoretical problems, with, for instance, with phylogenetic analysis and genome sequencing that produce similar invasion tree from the data. This is what NextStrain is offering on the website, and you know, as you see, there are similar patterns. Now the problem is how really match you know, the millions of simulations that are made with the computational models with the strain and the differences in the strain that are observed through the phylogenetic analysis of the different groups. So that's an open problem, but I think it's a very interesting issue of trying to match the two different perspectives. At this point, the model can be used also for epidemiological explanation, or, as I say, in some cases as a time machine, because at this point the model offers you to go one step back in early March, and the model observe what is going on in the United States, for instance, and you see that this is the timeline of cases in the United States, where you see there are very few detections of cases, and actually in New York, the first case from a local transmission is confirmed on March 1st. But actually, if you look at the number of transmissions in the different areas of the United States, they started in February, and at mid-February, there were hundreds of transmissions per day already. So this allows, you know, the model becomes a way to go and enters a description and understanding of the cryptic stages of an epidemic. And this is something important. For instance, early March, what we see is that while there were 23 confirmed cases of coronaviruses from local transmission in the US, very likely, at least in those cities, there were almost 20,000 infections. That doesn't mean that they were all active cases. Some of them, they were just exposed. Some of them are cases that travel from one place to another. But you have numbers at that stage, during the cryptic stage, that is not even the usual 5 to 10 under reporting, but actually you have a complete different perspective on the disease. That might be important when we think about the future. When we do reopen, we need to have not to be in the same situation as we were in February, March, in which, through testing and tracing, we need to be able to identify the various outbreaks and the various chains of transmissions. We don't want, again, to fall back into a situation in which there is cryptic transmission that we are not able to intercept until it becomes so large that we start to see hospital crowded. From there, you can, after, all this travel through the models, you go and look into the future. So how the disease will spread. At this point, however, it's crucial to have not just the model itself, but also what is the social distancing and interventions that the government are considering. And here is where, for instance, big data and new data are coming, are very important. We are teaming up with a mobile provider that actually allow us to track, positions, GPS position, etc., of a large fraction of individuals in the United States. And you see that you can really look at the different, would be the typical behavior of the mobility in the United States. This is pre-COVID, and then you see that it drops down abruptly when the state of emergency is declared, and now is regaining, is growing again because of the reopening in several states, as well as fatigue of people. And one can actually measure co-proximity and have also kind of proxy for the total contacts of people, although this doesn't consider all the contacts, for instance, not the household, etc. And you see also that this number goes down. For instance, in New York, really you can see the different effects of shelter in places and so on and so forth. And then, how now is started to again to get steam. So these data are very important. They are all anonymized, privacy preserving, a lot of things in order not to be invasive. But and these are aggregate measures at the census tract or larger areas. And so you see that they can provide data that you include in the model. And then in the model, you use that to make predictions and forecast and project what will happen in the next few weeks. This is where, the computational implementation hits the boundary of capacity. At this point, it's extremely important to have high performance computing. We are talking about 50 million runs every time that we do an update to the predictions, millions of instances. That means basically CPU on the cloud. Even the data analysis becomes complex because you need to have high performance data analysis where you can have a terabyte of data that are analyzed and put in database that are queryable. So this is where you can do this work. For us, we have to thank Google, because otherwise, without Google Cloud and their support, we won't be able to do the work that we do. And here again, in a sense, we are converging with weather forecast, where specific supercomputing infrastructure have to be thought and plug in the loop of what the modeling is if we want to go to a certain scale. And this is what, for instance, we do since at this point, I think almost 1 month, to produce forecast for the number of cases, actually of deaths projected in the US and different states. These are collected by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. There is a number of groups that provides those numbers. And then the idea is that the CDC generates an ensemble mechanism. This is really like for hurricane forecast. So each of these spaghetti model, it's one of the model from one of the teams participating to this initiative. And then one can generate ensemble forecast that provides more stability to what is the view for the future of the epidemic. Let me just in 2 minutes close by saying something that you can push on the pedal, and while it's extremely difficult to go to the level of the full complex agent-based model worldwide, first for the lack of data, but also because computationally becomes unapproachable, the problem, at least for the moment. It is possible to go down on specific, zoom in specific area, like for instance, this is the Boston metropolitan area that you see here, and creates those very highly detailed multiplex networks of contacts where you have school layer, workplace, and household, and try to get very detailed modeling of specific strategies or reopening approach for COVID. And here is where really you have to, again, even on the data side, put everything on steroids, because at this point you also are interested in the kind of location where people have co-proximity, like arts and entertainment, college and university, restaurants, nightlife, and sports events, outdoors and recreation. So what you can access now with actual data is those kind of proximity and contacts you have in the different settings, and you can simulate in a realistic way what the different stay-at-home orders or social distancing policing sort out as an effect on the population. For instance, here is the degree distribution in terms of number of contacts in a complete business as usual world, where there is a medium closure, where some businesses are closed, but there is still activities, and then where you shut down all non-essential work. And you see that really the number of contacts and the distribution of contacts of people is completely different. For instance, you see that it's completely disappear anything that is related to large scale event, and so on and so forth. This allows to project different scenarios in which you can really simulate in details the reopening and the relaxation of those social distancing measures, as well as simulate, you know, for instance, the effect of contact tracing and quarantine on individuals. I don't have the time to go into the details, but at this level of representation, and with that accuracy of data, you can really try to measure the number of individuals that have to be traced, how many contact tracers you have to put in the game, to keep, to satisfy the demand of contact tracing at the peak, and so on and so forth. And this allows to have a good understanding of what would be the effect of this kind of interventions in specific area. This is obviously for the Boston metropolitan area, might be very different from other areas which are less urbanized, with less more sprawled in terms of households, and where there is no mass transportation, and so on and so forth. So these at this level, each context matters in the response that you have in terms of assessing the impact of strategies and intervention policies. Well, let me close. I think we are all aware that at this point, you know, we are all working with a lot of assumptions. I didn't put for all this during this talk all the caveats and very lengthy disclosure of assumptions, etc., that every modeling exercise has. That goes from the lack of knowledge of certain parameter of the disease to also lack of real-time data in certain situations, and so on and so forth. However, you know, at this point we are in what we call generally the wartime. So we have to produce models and insight that might change completely the day after with new evidence, and we have to be ready for that. So this is not the regular scientific work where everything is tested and validated. But you know, every day you might have to change a little bit what you're doing. But this is the nature of the time we're living. And then we have peacetime. Peacetime is when, you know, we will revise all those things and we will produce better tools. We will understand better. And I want to say that some people call what we are doing now outbreak science, and they think outbreak science is very applied, is always with these things like how many cases or how many deaths you will have the next 4 weeks. These are questions which are very specific and maybe scientifically not thrilling, but I think it's very important. This outbreak science is what drive new problems and new foundational science problem whenever we work on those emergencies. I can stop here. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope, yeah, we have still a few minutes for questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I see one question here in the chat that is From Beth Bruce, you mentioned whether forecasting was the equivalent of a new satellite for us. Oh, that is great. I think, you know, the new satellite for us is what's happening with some of these mobile device companies, that if they could offer us worldwide global perspective of mobility and contact patterns among individuals in a way that is fully anonymized, is very well curated, it conforms to specific standards, that would really change the way that we approach outbreak science. And now in these days, we are always how to say, changing, you know, we are reinventing the wheel in many cases. I see in these days, we have done the analysis of mobility in the US, other people are using different data sources. I believe there should be more coordinations, and there should be something that is ready to use from day one, and not just when you are 2 months into the outbreak. As well, you know, something that is global. It's not just with, how to say, with that works in high income countries, or and how to say, neglecting other regions of the world. And I see from the chat that was there, so thank you for your questions. So I think if that would be possible, that would really advance the field. Unfortunately, this is, you know, it's there is some people, like for instance, Kathleen Rivers is advocating a lot about, you know, creating an institution like the National Weather Forecast Service that is for outbreak science and infectious disease spreading, so that we can have some aggregator, and especially some institution that can start to generate those satellite, if you want, between quotes.
We have a question which says, running those analyses must be quite expensive. How do you assess the cost effectiveness of this approach compared to simpler, lighter weight models?
Yeah, some of those are quite expensive, and in the sense that, again, if you think about computing time and human resources that you need to involve, it's for sure more expensive than the simple modeling that in some cases can provide some nice and good insight. I think it's a trade-off that you have always to keep in mind. In a sense, you know, especially if you don't have the good data, those methods could be they could not improve that much perhaps on the simpler model. So instead, if you start to have a situation like the one we have now in the United States, with states that are reopening, states that are still under a full shelter-in-place order, and you really want to understand the dynamics and the subtleties of what's happening, I think you need to have more detailed models, and at that point, it's worth the cost. 2 months ago, perhaps, if you want to have just an understanding of if reopening could provide a resurgence or not of the epidemic, that perhaps a simpler modeling approach would be as good as a more complex one. So I think we need always to look at the questions, the problem, the time to answer the questions, and this is that's the exercise.
Thank you. I have a question. We identified earlier that you might say that the models are good, but it's the connection to data that is so difficult for this disease. And I wondered if I want to ask a question which really goes in both directions. One is, what data would be most helpful on how contacts work that would allow you to do better forecasting? And I suppose the question the other way is, does your modeling in any way help to say which contacts are most important, and thus,
yeah, well, you know that I think that there are several modeling approaches that have already put you know, emphasis on contacts, like if you think about all the studies for contact matrices and contact patterns, what is the role of schools with respect to the role of household, etc. These are all work that has been very important to pinpoint what are the major components in terms of both the number of contacts and the relevance of those contacts. I think the more we get into an agent-based model perspective, the more exactly those questions can be answered. For instance, in the work we have done on the Boston metropolitan area, in the supplementary material, we are reopening schools, and we are looking at the detailed effect of reopening schools. And this is because we can measure the duration of contacts, assume what is the time spent together. So I think the data that we would need is really data on contacts and on transmissibility of contacts. It would be important to have more understanding of the attack rate within families and have more prompt data on that comes from the clinical studies. I think it's important to state that it's impossible to, this modeling needs, however, the part on the clinical data and our epidemiological understanding of the disease transmission. So we need to know, for instance, differential, one of the major questions is still the differential susceptibility across ages. This is something that, you know, must be answered first by data which are, you know, the actual clinical data, by the studies of specific clusters. And so these are important data that then we can plug in the model and say, well, if kids are less susceptible, what is the relevance of schools in the transmission of the disease at the population level? So I don't think that it's very difficult to say one data set is more important than others. We need to have those data sets. For sure, for outbreak science, in many cases, you can say, well, for excess of precaution, I say, well, kids are infectious as everybody else. So that's because you want to depict a worst case scenario. But, you know, everything that comes in terms of understanding better the mechanism of transmissions, as well as the setting for transmissions. And so that means the data on the social contact patterns, that they are both extremely important.
Thank you. Do we have one more question, perhaps? No, there doesn't seem to be anything in the chat. So if not, we've reached 5:30. So thank you very, very much for your time, Alessandro. And I think that we hope you'll continue to be involved with the research program, which runs until August. So there's plenty of time to ask you further questions and to have some discussions, I hope. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I will do my best to attend the session. So thanks a lot. It has been great to talk to you and keep in touch.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.